On a gray afternoon in 1999, a small group of executives gathered in a boardroom in Tennessee and voted to shut down Arnold Palmer's Golf Company. Ask anyone in the industry what killed it, and you'll get the same answer every time. Titanium. The arms race. The era when a driver head became a science project and research budgets swelled past what an entire small company was worth. No little manufacturer could survive that war. Everybody knows it. That's the story everyone believed. It's the wrong story, because the thing that destroyed Arnold Palmer's Golf Company wasn't made of titanium. It wasn't forged or cast or milled, it was made of paper. One contract, signed by a 25-year-old with steelworkers' hands, worth exactly $5,000 a year. A contract so lopsided, so quietly booby-trapped, that it would shape the next 45 years of the most famous name in golf. And here's the part that makes no sense. Arnold Palmer practically invented the modern athlete empire. He was the first sportsman in history to become a walking corporation. Clothing lines, car dealerships, aviation companies, a drink with his name on it that outsold his trophies. The man turned a handshake into more money than Hogan, Nelson, and Snead earned in their combined careers. But the one company closest to his heart, the one that put his own name on a golf club, is the one that slipped through his fingers. Stay with me to the end of the story, because there's a moment coming. A single meeting in a Chicago office and a single 3-word answer where everything turned. And once you hear it, you will never look at that old Palmer club in your garage the same way again. This is the story of the Arnold Palmer Golf Company, and it begins with the most expensive bargain in the history of sports. In the autumn of 1954, Arnold Palmer was the hottest amateur in American golf. He had just won the United States Amateur Championship at the Country Club of Detroit, hitting the ball with a lash that made older pros wince and galleries roar. He was the son of a greenskeeper from Latrobe, Pennsylvania. He had poured concrete, served in the Coast Guard, and sold paint to pay his way. Now the professional game was calling. And so was Wilson Sporting Goods. Understand what Wilson meant in 1954. This was the Royal Court of Golf. Their staff was a wall of legends: Sam Snead, Gene Sarazen, Walter Hagen, Patty Berg, and Julius Boros. If you played Wilson, you had arrived. When they offered the young amateur a contract, it felt less like a business deal and more like a knighthood. The terms were 3 years at $5,000 a year. Palmer signed almost without looking. In fairness, $5,000 was real money to a man whose entire tour winnings over that stretch would come to roughly $20,000. He was newly married, he was broke, he was grateful. But Arnold Palmer never read the fine print. And the fine print was where Wilson lived. The contract was worldwide. Palmer could not earn a dime from his own name anywhere on earth without Wilson's approval. The royalty rates on clubs bearing his signature were among the lowest on the staff. And buried in the language was a clause that bordered on comedy. Anytime Palmer endorsed any other product, a shirt, a car, anything, the advertisement had to mention Wilson too. Imagine a commercial where the hero can't praise a razor blade without thanking a sporting goods company first. That was Arnold Palmer's business life. He didn't mind. The president of Wilson, Fred Bowman, had given him a warm verbal promise. If you are ever unhappy, Arnie, you can walk away. Gentlemen kept their word. Palmer believed that to his bones because his father had raised him too. A verbal promise, it would turn out, is worth exactly the paper it's printed on. In 1957, the contract came up for renewal. By now, Palmer was winning tournaments and filling galleries. This was the moment to renegotiate, the moment any modern agent would have circled in red ink. Instead, Palmer signed again. Same terms, same $5,000, 3 more years. He was a handshake man in a fine print world, and the fine print world was keeping score. A year later, he won the Masters. He became the leading money winner on the entire tour. He was, by any measure, the most valuable property in golf. Wilson was still paying him like a promising rookie. Other men on the staff, men Palmer was beating on Sundays, were earning more than he was. Palmer didn't know that, because nobody at Wilson was in a hurry to tell him. Enter the lawyer. In late 1959, Palmer shook hands with a young Cleveland attorney named Mark McCormack. No contract between them, just a handshake, which tells you everything about Palmer. That handshake founded what became the International Management Group, the agency that would one day run world sport. Arnold Palmer was client number one. McCormack did what lawyers do. He read the paperwork. And what he found in the Wilson file made his stomach drop. He called it the meat and potatoes contract, the deal Palmer's whole business life hung on. And it was, in his words, virtually the same agreement a nervous amateur had signed in 1954. The royalties were tiny. The restrictions were suffocating. The biggest star in golf was locked in a cage built for a beginner. McCormack went to his client. "Arnold," he said, "this is not a good deal. Let me fix it." And Palmer waved him off. "Let's talk about it some other time," he said. "They're nice people. They'll do whatever's fair. There won't be any trouble," Palmer told him. "They told me so. They told me so." Write that sentence down because this entire story swings on it. But while Palmer trusted, the game around him was changing. 1960 arrived and Arnold Palmer detonated. He won at Palm Springs, he won the Texas Open, he won at Baton Rouge. Then he charged from behind on the final holes to win the Masters, hitching his trousers and marching up the last fairway like a man collecting a debt. And that summer at Cherry Hills in Denver, he authored the most famous single afternoon in American golf. 7 shots off the lead going into the final round of the United States Open, written off by the press tent. Palmer stepped onto the first tee, pulled his driver, and flew the ball onto the green of the opening hole, a shot nobody sane attempted. He birdied 6 of the first 7. He shot the round of his life. He tore through the field like weather and took the national championship by force. Television found him that year, and it never let go. Housewives who had never touched a golf club knew his name. Men who had never walked a fairway bought sets because of him. An army formed behind the ropes, his army, and it followed him for the rest of his life. Money came pouring toward him from every direction, and one offer stood out above all the rest. A Tennessee equipment man named Jack Harkins, who ran a scrappy company called First Flight, approached McCormack with a vision, a premium line of clubs sold only in pro shops designed by Arnold Palmer himself. The numbers were staggering for the era. A guaranteed $150,000 against royalties, a seat on the board, stock options Harkins valued at $500,000 more, bonuses for winning majors that dwarfed anything Wilson paid, $5,000 for a single Masters win, the same amount Wilson paid him for an entire year of his life. For the first time, Palmer could see it clearly. His name was worth a fortune, and someone else was collecting it. And outside the cage, the fortune was already arriving. McCormack was stacking up deals the Wilson contract couldn't reach. A Florida clothing maker guaranteed Palmer more than $1 million to put his name on a line of slacks. $1 million. For trousers. While the finest golf clubs in his bag, the things he actually held in his hands to earn his living, paid him $5,000 a year and a pat on the head. Corporations began sprouting around Palmer like rings around a tree. At the center of the fastest growing business empire in sports sat one absurdity nobody could fix. Golf clubs were the one thing Arnold Palmer barely earned a dime from. McCormack, playing it straight, informed Wilson about the First Flight talks, and that's when Wilson reached into the drawer and pulled out the trap. Buried in the 1954 agreement was an option clause. Wilson, and only Wilson, could extend the contract by 3 more years. They were exercising it. Arnold Palmer, the most famous athlete in America, was bound to his rookie deal until October 31st, 1963, 9 years. The 9 best years of his career sold for $5,000 a year because of a paragraph nobody had explained to a 25-year-old in 1954. But Palmer still believed there wouldn't be any trouble. They had told him so. So in the spring of 1960, Palmer and McCormack flew to Chicago to meet the Wilson brass face-to-face. The executives were charming. They painted glorious pictures, big plans, a prestige Palmer line, fortunes for everyone. The room was warm right up until McCormack asked the only question that mattered. Fred Bowman was gone by then. A new president, Bill Holmes, sat across the table. McCormack asked him directly, if Arnold requested a release from this contract based on the assurances your own people gave him, would you grant it? The room went quiet. The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. Then Holmes said 3 words. No, we would not. 3 words. That's the hinge of this whole story. Not a lawsuit, not a scandal, just 3 quiet words in a Chicago office and the sound of a handshake promise being fed into a shredder. To soften the blow, Holmes offered something else. A brand new long-term contract. 10 years. Real royalties. The restrictive clauses gone. Palmer, still loyal, still wanting to believe, agreed to the framework. Hands were shaken. McCormack spent months drafting the new deal, better royalties, freedom to endorse, a deferred income plan, and an insurance arrangement to protect Palmer's future. Wilson's own golf executives approved it all. The cage door was finally opening. But Wilson Sporting Goods didn't belong to Wilson Sporting Goods. The company was a small subsidiary of Wilson and Company, a Chicago meatpacking giant. And the meatpacking giant had a new chairman of the board, an autocratic former judge named James D. Cooney. The renegotiated Palmer contract landed on his desk in the winter of 1960. The judge read it once and threw it out. Deferred income, special insurance. His own executives didn't get benefits like that. Besides, didn't they already have this Palmer fellow under contract through 1963? That was the reasoning. The greatest drawing card in the history of golf, the man single-handedly dragging the sport onto television, was vetoed by a meatpacking chairman who saw him as a line item with a signature. Think about that the next time somebody tells you the golf business is about golf. Now, 1 month earlier, something had happened in a New York snowstorm that suddenly mattered very much. December 1960. Palmer flew up from Florida, McCormack from Cleveland. They checked into the Plaza Hotel and walked through the swirling snow to a restaurant across the street for dinner. Over that table, McCormack laid out a bigger idea than any endorsement. "You're being too conservative," he told Palmer. "You have a chance no golfer has ever had." And then he said the sentence that connects this story to another one we've told on this channel. "There is an even better way. You could follow Ben Hogan's example and set up your own company. You are that big." Ben Hogan had done it in Fort Worth, built his own club company, his own name over the door, answering to nobody. We told you how that ended. But in 1960, Hogan was the proof it could be done. Palmer listened. And then, incredibly, he said no. "I could probably make more money going another route," he admitted. "But I'd feel more comfortable not turning my back on Wilson. They're nice people. Work it out with them. Loyalty. Even then, even after the option clause." Arnold Palmer chose loyalty right up until the moment the meatpacking judge made loyalty impossible. Because when word came back in February that the chairman had killed the new contract, something in Palmer finally broke. McCormack and Palmer made Wilson one last offer, and it was almost embarrassingly generous. Palmer would repay every dollar Wilson had ever paid him, roughly $75,000. He would buy back their entire inventory of Palmer clubs and balls. He would even reimburse Wilson for any lost sales his new venture caused. Total surrender terms, just to leave with a clean conscience. Wilson's answer, no. He would serve out the option, every last day of it, until October 31st, 1963. But you can hold a man to a contract and lose him completely. From that day forward, Palmer later admitted he felt no loyalty at all. Wilson still had his signature on their clubs. They no longer had the man. And the man, quietly, patiently, with 3 years to plan, started building the thing McCormack had described in the snowstorm. They were going to start the Arnold Palmer Golf Company. October 31st, 1963. Halloween night, the option expired, and Arnold Palmer walked out of the cage he'd signed himself into as a 25-year-old. He was free. The company born of that freedom would carry his name for the rest of the century and would not live to see the one after it. But nobody knew that yet. That night, all anyone knew was that Wilson had just learned what freedom cost them. The Arnold Palmer Golf Company opened its doors with the king himself designing the clubs, a tinkerer since childhood, a man whose home workshop in Latrobe held thousands of club heads, rasps, files, lead tape, and spray paint. Palmer didn't just endorse his clubs, he carved on them. He obsessed over them. Visitors said the workshop looked like a museum of golf equipment curated by the one man who could actually use all of it. And Wilson? Wilson did something small and cold and very revealing. They still owned the tooling for the putter Palmer had made famous, the elegant flanged blade stamped "Designed by Arnold Palmer." The moment he left, they scraped his name off it and gave it a number instead. The 8802, remember that nameless putter? It comes back at the end of this story at the Masters, in the hands of another man entirely. But here's what nobody tells you about the Arnold Palmer Golf Company. For most of its life, it wasn't really Palmer's company at all. And that's where the destruction in this story starts doing its slow, patient work. The corporate machinery behind Palmer's clubs traces back to a Chattanooga outfit incorporated in 1932 as the Professional Golf Company. In 1966, it merged with First Flight, yes, that First Flight, Jack Harkins's company, the same suitor who had first shown Palmer his own value back in 1960. The trap Wilson built had pushed Palmer toward Tennessee, after all. In 1975, the whole operation renamed itself ProGroup Incorporated. Palmer didn't just lend the enterprise his name. Starting in the early 70s, he lent it his money. A serious share of his own fortune sunk into keeping his clubs alive. Yet the company struggled almost from the start. The equipment business was brutal, low margin, and crowded. ProGroup lurched from year to year while Palmer's other ventures, the clothing, the endorsements, the course design, the aviation, printed money around it. The golf company was the family member that could never quite get on its feet, and Palmer kept writing checks because his name was on the door. And yet those clubs got played. If you learned this game in the 70s or 80s, there's a fair chance your first set, or your father's set, or the mismatched hand-me-downs in the garage carried the Palmer name somewhere on the sole. They weren't the exotic blades of the tour vans. They were honest clubs for ordinary golfers, priced for school teachers and shift workers, sold on the promise that a little of the king's magic came stamped into the steel. Millions of rounds, millions of Saturday mornings. Whatever the balance sheets in Chattanooga said, those clubs earned their keep in the only ledger that matters on this channel, memory. It got bad enough that the company needed rescuing. The rescuer was Jack Lupton, a Coca-Cola bottling magnate from Chattanooga, a golf purist and a friend of Palmer's who bailed the operation out and took the chairman's seat. Under Lupton, the company went public. It diversified, Hot-Z golf bags, luggage, and eventually an entire equipment line built around another beloved name, Nancy Lopez. Then, in the summer of 1996, came the move that looked like a triumph and reads, in the fine print, like an omen. ProGroup officially changed its corporate name to the Arnold Palmer Golf Company. But look closer, the way McCormack once looked at that Wilson contract. The name wasn't owned, it was licensed. The right to be called the Arnold Palmer Golf Company existed only as long as a license agreement with Palmer's own enterprises stayed in force. And the moment it lapsed, the corporation would legally snap back to being plain old ProGroup, automatically, without so much as a board vote. After 9 years trapped inside someone else's contract, Palmer's people had learned the lesson forever. Never let anyone truly own your name, not even your own company. The company called Arnold Palmer was borrowing Arnold Palmer. Paper, once again, quietly running the show. Now, while all this was happening in Chattanooga, what became of the company that started it all? Wilson kept its throne for a while. The staff blades stayed legendary through the 70s. But in 1970, the sporting goods division was sold to PepsiCo, a beverage conglomerate, and the slide began. The new owners chased volume, boxed sets, department stores, stacked them high golf clubs for shoppers who didn't know a blade from a shovel. The pro shops noticed. The tour players drifted away. The brand that once knighted young champions became the brand you found next to the lawn chairs. We told that whole story in our Wilson film, how the winningest name in major championship history ended up on a shelf in Walmart. But see it now from this angle. The company that wouldn't pay Arnold Palmer a fair royalty was owned, within 7 years of losing him, by a soda corporation liquidating its prestige for volume. Wilson held Palmer's contract to the last day and lost the future. Palmer kept his freedom and built an empire. Both of them, in the end, watched their club businesses get devoured by the same disease, bigness, and the brutal economics of a game that was changing faster than either could afford. I want to step out from behind the narration for a moment because something happened while I was researching this one. I was reading the company's final annual report, an actual securities filing, dry as sawdust, and I found a sentence that stopped me cold. By its last years, the Arnold Palmer Golf Company had consolidated its club manufacturing into its bag factory. Into the bag factory. The clubs of the king, the man whose workshop held thousands of club heads he'd shaped with his own hands, were being squeezed into a corner of a building in Pocahontas, Arkansas, that existed to sew luggage. I sat with that for a long time, because filings like that are written to hide feelings, and this one failed. Somewhere behind that sentence was a room full of people who loved golf, doing arithmetic that refused to come out right, moving the last club-making machines across a bag factory floor, and knowing exactly what it meant. That's not a business decision you read, that's one you feel. And I'd bet everything that Arnold Palmer, a man who could tell you the loft of a wedge by holding it, felt it more than anyone. Because by then, the war had arrived. The 90s changed golf equipment forever. Titanium drivers the size of grapefruits, aerospace engineers on staff, television campaigns during every tournament, tour pros paid fortunes just to put a logo in the corner of the screen. Callaway, TaylorMade, Titleist, and the other giants turned club making into a technology race where the entry fee was measured in the hundreds of millions and rising every season. A new driver now needed patents, robots, wind tunnels, and a launch budget bigger than everything the Arnold Palmer Golf Company owned put together. A small Chattanooga company with a licensed name and a bag factory never had a chance. It fought anyway. It hired serious talent. Cindy Davis, who would later run one of the biggest golf brands in the world, took the helm as president. It even chased innovation, including a radical titanium driver designed with no grip at all to strip precious weight from the club. Clever. Bold. Not nearly enough. In a war of budgets, courage is not a currency. Which brings us back to where we started that gray afternoon in 1999. The company went private that year. And then Palmer and Lupton, two old friends who had poured money and decades into the thing, sat down and made the call no one wanted to make. There was no bankruptcy judge, no hostile raider, no fire sale forced on them. They chose to liquidate, to close the doors themselves with dignity, rather than watch the king's name get carved up in a courtroom. Everyone involved concluded, reluctantly, that a small equipment company simply could not survive in the modern golf industry. Read that sentence again. The most beloved man in the history of the sport could not keep a golf club company alive. That is how completely the game had changed. But notice what Arnold Palmer never did. He never blamed the market out loud without also, in quieter moments, tracing the thread further back. The company was born late, 3 years late, held hostage to an option clause. It was born angry, out of a betrayal instead of a business plan. It spent its whole life undercapitalized, licensed, merged, rescued, and renamed, always one step behind rivals who had entered the race on time. Pull the thread back through Lupton, through ProGroup, through First Flight, through the Chicago boardroom and the meatpacking judge, and the three words, "No, we would not," and you arrive every single time at the same sheet of paper. One contract, signed in 1954, $5,000 a year. There's a coda to this story, and it happens where all golf stories go to become immortal. Augusta National. Springtime, 1995. Ben Crenshaw, grieving the death of his teacher Harvey Pennick, plays the tournament of his life and wins the Masters. On the final green, he doubles over and weeps into his hands. And the putter he's holding, the putter that just won a green jacket in the most emotional victory the tournament has ever seen, is a Wilson 8802. The nameless putter, the one that used to say, designed by Arnold Palmer before Wilson scraped the name off in 1963. Arnold Palmer's design won at Augusta that Sunday, and almost nobody watching knew it because the name was gone. Wilson kept the steel and lost the signature, and here's the little twist collectors already know. The later nameless version of that putter is everywhere, a fine club, easy to find, worth modest money. The originals, the ones that still say designed by Arnold Palmer, are rare because Wilson stopped making them the moment he walked. Today, an original can cost you around $1,000, many times what the nameless one brings. The market, in its slow and honest way, delivered the verdict Wilson's chairman never understood. The name was always worth more than the paper. If you want this whole story in a single object, that's it. Arnold Palmer kept tinkering to the very end. Visitors to Latrobe described the workshop with the hushed voices people use in churches, thousands of club heads hanging in rows, persimmon and steel and titanium, rasps and lead tape and spray paint, half a century of restless hands. He would pull 20 clubs into a bag meant for 14 and wander the course, testing them, unwrapping and rewrapping the leather grips as he walked, still chasing something no factory ever quite delivered. The company was gone. The love never was. He died in September of 2016 in Pennsylvania, not far from that workshop. The empire he built survives him: the drink, the umbrella, the hospitals, the airport with his name on it, the handshake with McCormack that invented an entire industry of athlete fortunes. The golf company didn't. It's been gone for a quarter of a century now, and somewhere in your garage, maybe behind the mower, maybe in that dusty bag in the corner, there's a decent chance a Palmer club is leaning against the wall, waiting for you to remember it. Go take a look. Check the sole, check the stamping. And when you pick it up, remember what it actually cost. Not the $20 at the pro shop sale, not the millions lost in Chattanooga. $5,000 a year, the price of a king in 1954, set by men who thought they were getting a bargain. They were wrong about that too.